Hello and welcome to Extra Hours. I'm Guy Cochran filling in for Grant Whitehead, who is in Australia in production today. This is the evening version of the show. Depending on what part of the world you're in, you can ask questions just like you do in the morning show, but this one's geared towards other people around the world that may not have the opportunity to catch us in the morning or in the wee hours of the night in the 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time show. So we have Mukana where you could ask your questions, and we've got an intimate panel this evening. We've got Alexander Knight, who will be our reader. Yeah, Alexander, you want to go ahead and give us a little...
Good to be here, and hello to everybody in the future who's on the other side of the world waking up right now.
Nice.
Good to be here.
And then we've got Alex Lindsay. How you doing,
Hello,
Alex?
hello. Good to be here.
I think we can make it with 3 folks this fine evening and lots of producer questions. I could see Roscoe's already throwing us some.
Roscoe's throwing some down the road. It all depends on our listeners as our producers. If the producers don't feel like they need to ask a lot of questions, then it'll be a short show.
It might be a short show. So those folks that are celebrating Cinco de Mayo might be able to get out there with their margaritas and go have some burritos and tacos and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Before the show, we were talking a little bit about Memo Live and these ISO records. Alexander Knight, you want to kind of fill us in on your experience with this varying frame rate?
So it all started with some issues that I've had with, and I still had not determined through some of these problems that I had whether it was the drive or not. And I did try a couple of NVMe drives, but I've had some failures with ISO recordings just stopping in the middle of a show. They would just stop, and sometimes what would happen is the ISO records would stop, and you'd get the dialogue window that shows the file names and everything like that, and it would say 0 kilobytes for data written. So it had not written any data, which is really odd. Anyways, I've been reporting some of these problems to Boinks, and through some of that, they discover a couple of things. Number one, they discovered that if a Zoom participant had unstable frame rate, it could affect the ISO record and what you would get in the results. Like, for example, I just had an issue a couple weeks ago where I was recording some Zoom participants, and my document, which for those that don't use Memo, a document is basically how you define the frame rate and the resolution of the whole template, essentially what you're operating at. So
you kind of think of it as your video tape, like if it's a 3/4 inch tape, that's essentially what it is. It's just running at a certain speed, and it's a certain guaranteed, it's supposed to be locked. Like you set it and forget it, kind of like you would with a VCR.
You would think, ideally. I had it set to 2997, which actually for other reasons, I've now changed it to a whole frame rate 30, but more on that in a sec. So when I looked at the ISO records after the call had ended, one of the people on the other end, I looked at the file and I played it, and it was running in slow motion. I said, what's happening here? And I looked at the file properties, and it said that the frame rate was half of what the document had been set to. So it was 15. Now, of course, I can fix that in post, and I did. But he found that if somebody had an unstable frame rate, it could affect the recording output. So that's being fixed in the latest betas, which is currently, as of this show, it is 6.11 beta 2. So they've been kind of fixing a lot of issues. Some of the other guys
just don't do this. They don't have the ability to do this. So I know some people at Wirecast, and I needed this exact feature to try out, and so I asked them for another favor to put something in Wirecast, and they're like, okay, I'll talk to the product manager and we'll get that put in. But then I was like, wait, I can't even ISO record. So they have in their professional version a way to ISO, and I was like, okay, I want to just take a Zoom participant, I want to ISO him, just like so for this show, for example, we want to take all 3 of us and ISO him. So I'm doing this right now on a Mac Mini M4. This is what it looks like. There's 3 recorders going on in H.264. So you could use something like Justin from Justin Mac, which is an app that would cost you quite a bit of money. and that's made by Tools on Air. So there's people that have done this for a long time. And then on the vMix side, on the PC side, you could do it with vMix. There's very few tools that could do this. So this is really cool, because I have 9 Key Pros over there that could do the same thing, and that's how I usually do it, with 9 Key Pros. But now I'm stuck in these big formats. It doesn't do H.264, it doesn't do H.265, so it's not very efficient to ISO record and then you got to get them off the key stores, which is ancient technology. It's Firewire 800 or 1 gigabit. So you've got some ISO records now, and you just tested them and burned them in, and how's it looking?
Yeah. Everything's working really, really well. And I will say they also added a very useful feature. So now if you go into your file recording settings, you can actually force it to use the frame rate that is defined in your Memo Live document. So for example, if I've set it to 30, I can force it to say, just be always at 30, doesn't matter. And that may increase the reliability of the recording as well. So that's how I've been testing it with the latest beta. And I'm pretty confident that's now going to fix that.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm excited to see how well this all plays out. I mean, I'll let everybody know how this goes. In a perfect world, I want to be able to put these records up and then play them back out through Zoom, which is a whole nother animal. So anybody who's watching the show now would be able to recut this show using the tools, whatever they want, Wirecast or any of the Zoom integration tools. So Memo Live, Ecamm, because it's getting exciting. I mean, especially for teachers who want to teach kids this, it's something that
absolutely.
I think it should
I just
be a
wanted
skill,
to add one other thing too. I just wanted to add one other thing to your point about your interaction with companies in general when you either bring up issues or submit feature requests, and you go through that whole chain of command. We're gonna bring it up with our product developer team, and then it's kind of like you never hear from them, right? I just want to give a shout out to Oliver Breidenbach at Boing Software, because now a lot of us that are part of the Office communities that know him well, that know him from Discord as well, because he lurks there and answers all of our questions. I just want to say, for like people that don't know Boing Software, they are so responsive to your issues, to your feature suggestions. It's like, I just feel like I have a much more one-on-one personal connection, a relationship. It's like, when you kind of forge a relationship with your local dealer, you get better customer service. And I really feel like that. I don't mean this to sound like a commercial, but I've had such a great experience, and he's been very responsive and very generous with his time, just even helping me set up Memo and getting it working. And like, and I keep finding stuff all the time, and he keeps fixing issues. So like, they're so responsive. And actually, I just, it's funny. This just goes to show you, like, sometimes you don't unearth all issues during software testing when you're creating applications. But I ran into an issue where with my audio pipeline with Dante, I wanted to pipe ISO audio feeds out of Memo Live over Dante into a digital console so I could process the audio and then pipe it back into Memo Live. And as I was setting this up and testing it, I ran into a channel limitation. Like, I created all these ISO audio outputs, and suddenly when I added the 9th one, it wouldn't let me turn it on. And they had no idea that this limitation existed. So it's like, sometimes you don't unearth issues until people really push it to the edge.
It depends on how many that someone's tested. A lot of times the software, even though they didn't put a limit in it, it's hidden somewhere in there. I had this issue when I was working on Star Wars. I had a little render farm, and we were using this thing. Electric Image had this render system to queue all of these up, and I was talking to the developer who manages that, and he said, "Oh, it works perfectly for me." And I had 8 computers and it would just constantly be dropping. Like, just forget, it would just forget renders. It wouldn't give me back all the frames. It wouldn't do it was all these things that we hit. And he said, it works perfectly. I can't reproduce what you're talking about. And I said, how many computers do you have? And he said 3. And I said, I have 8. And he's like, well, that shouldn't make any difference. I didn't make any limits, but it was the network bandwidth that was he hadn't taken into account if you've got 8 computers, there's a lot more network chatter that's going on, and it's causing this other issue that but it was a funny thing. It depends on what they were actually testing on, and a lot of times that's what is so valuable, I think, to a lot of developers. And Oliver is so responsive. Like that's one of the incredible things about working with Oliver, and why the reason that I use Mimo Live for some of the stuff that I do is because Oliver's so responsive, and things happen, and I either get fixes or I'm told what I'm doing wrong, which oftentimes is the case. Like I just don't know how to do something. And so, but yeah, he's, but I think that we provide a really good use, especially when we can clearly define a problem or clearly define a feature. So a lot of times I'll sit there and try to think of a way, if something's wrong, what are the keystrokes that created that? And I try to get to a point where I can do it every time, like make something do something I didn't expect it to, or I send a picture or whatever. But I think that that's always something valuable that we can always provide back to developers, is that a lot of times we just get used to doing it the way, because it's weird. You just do this. A lot of production people, we just learn to go like this when you get near the door, and you don't try to fix what's making you go like this. You just do it. You kind of, and so, yeah, Oliver's been great about evolving the app with us.
Yeah, it's amazing. Back in the Final Cut 1 days, there was this 2-pop forum. I don't know if you remember it, Alex, but there was a guy on there, Ralph Fairweather, who was the Inside Apple guy, and he was always taking the feedback from us and giving it up to the developers. Then these features would get put in, because there were real Hollywood pros that were saying like, hey, we need this exact frame rate, or we're cutting film and we need this to match. And so companies evolved out of those forums, from people needing these certain things and them getting actually inside with the developers. So it's so cool when we get software developers that listen, that are in the community, and that actually will float it up and say that's doable, or add it to the list of 1,000 feature requests. But if enough people ring that bell, then they get it done. They float it up to the top. Or if it's a hot fix, it's great. Just like Andy Carluccio being around with us in our community, he's listened to so much feedback that's been implemented. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean the Zoom team, the Zoom broadcast team, is the liminal team that does those things, is the most effective corporate team I've ever worked with. They just, the amount that they're getting done. And usually you kind of want to bring something up, but that they're like 3 steps ahead. So
4K HDR. What are we gonna see? Professional Zoom broadcast in 4K.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you always have to think about like who's going to use it and how's it going to be used and everything else. I will say that I've really thought about this a lot. I'd rather see higher frame rate than higher resolution. Like if I was going to get something from someone, I think that 1080 is probably fine for most things, but I would love to see 60 frames a second, because I think that it makes it feel more immediate. I feel the more frames you get, the more real it feels, in my opinion. And so film is fine when it's a dream. So 24 frames a second is when you're reproducing dreams. Then 24 frames a second. I guess we all dream in low frame rate. But as we increase that frame rate, our eye is about 480, 500, somewhere in that range, frames per second. So as we close the distance between what our eye can see and what we and what's as we close that distance, it starts to feel more and more indistinguishable from reality.
We need a RAM upgrade, or a CPU upgrade, or
exactly.
whatever it is, a GPU upgrade, so we can get 120 frames in our dreams.
I would love to see 100. I mean, I'm doing some work right now at 120 frames a second, and it is magical. But it's funny, people won't get it. They won't look at it. They kind of look at it, and I don't understand. And then all I do is split screen it with 60. so I have this thing now where I do a split screen, and now I'm working on a new animation where it slides over like this. And so you suddenly 60 starts to look framey, and it's funny because to me, I keep on looking at 24. I'm doing so much work at 120 that I keep on looking at 24. And I'm like, what is wrong with this movie? Like, I just look at it like my brain is like, what is wrong? And it's like so framey. And I was like, there's something wrong with the play out. And I realized that's just 24. So
That's the way we've been watching it forever. Yeah, that's one of the cool things about going to CES is 4 years ago, I saw displays with 120 frames per second, and it was just like, wow, this is the future. So you get a glimpse into this this world that is way away. Like I got to try on the first Oculus back in 2016 when Oculus was a company, and I heard that was going to be the big thing. And then Facebook acquires them, and look at, you can buy them at Costco now. They're like selling like, you know, candy. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Roscoe's got a first question. Alexander, you want to go ahead and kick us off with that first one?
Absolutely. First question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Have you ever lost interest in a project? What helped you stay focused and complete the job?
Yeah, Alex Lindsay.
Deadlines and bills, mostly. Like, you know, there's a lot of things that I get over. You know, I oftentimes get over a lot of things about how I feel about projects based on what needs to get done. You know, like, and so as far as you know, I think that one of the things that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about right now. I happen to be working on a project I'm very passionate about, but I've spent a decade working on projects that I would say 8 out of 10 of the projects were not particularly interesting. Like they weren't exciting or anything else, but they were, you know, solid projects. What I focused on was the technology and the technique and the process and improving how I did the project. What the project was became meaningless to me. Like I just didn't care what the project was. In fact, in Pixel Core, if you showed that you were interested, we did all of these, you know, interviews with actors and players and politicians. If you showed any interest in any of those, you wouldn't be on the project. Like, so we had one person that was a semi-pro, almost a semi-pro basketball player, and we were doing a big hangout with someone that was a pretty popular basketball player. He couldn't be on we wouldn't put him on the project because we just didn't want him to be distracted by the content, you know. And so for us, most of the time we were just, so for me, it kind of got to a point where I don't really think about the project at all. I think about the technology that is delivering the project, and that interests me all the time. Like, you know, the making sure the cameras are perfect, making sure the audio is perfect. You know, someone asked, because I worked for both the Republican and Democratic Party a lot in 2016, and somebody asked me what my politics were, and I said, my politics is that everybody's in focus and they sound great. so like, you know, like I just, you know, that's all I worry about. Yeah.
Nice. All right, let's jump on over to the next question.
This one's from Jeff Veely in Henderson, Texas. I'd love to hear a deep dive building grids with autopoles, tracks, ceilings below, Alex's friction fit with speed rail.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I'm not an autopole guy. Like, I don't understand autopoles. Like, I know people use them, and people who have autopoles love autopoles. I feel like using tension like that makes me very nervous, and I know that it probably should work just fine, but it makes me very nervous. And so I use speed rail, or I use right now. Well, I should be nervous. I have MakerPipe on, and MakerPipe is amazing. I'm overusing it. So there's a 10 by 10 square that I'm inside of. That's a grid that I built with MakerPipe, and it's on 4 C stands. Just pulled it up, and you know, it's hard for me. I don't have a camera to show you, but it's got, you know, I've got lights and things, and anything I want to rig up there, I can rig it up. I've got all kind, you know. So it's the first thing that I do when I say I'm going to sit here for a little while is I build a grid. And the reason that I build the grid very quickly is just because I find that I am less creative when anything is other than a grid. Like, you know, if I get anywhere weird, this is what happens with auto poles and everything else, weird dynamics or weird angles or whatever, things that are hard, things that have weird things to connect to it. Like, what's nice about a grid with speed rail is that there's all kinds of fixtures and you can kind of use them all, but you can also just grab a Mayfer and just go and just grab onto it and pull something out and attach it. And so I think that is why I'm, you know, and again, I didn't have, I'm trying to think, probably 15 years ago, this gaffer who has a big truck and everything else told me about that I should get a grid. And he's like, "You're crazy not to have a grid." And I'm like, "I've never had a grid. I don't need a grid. I don't know why I would have a grid." Blah, 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 blah. And then he came over to my house. He said, "Just if you can pay for the pipe, I'll build it for you." And I was like, "Sure." And so I I paid for the pipe. He came over with a chop saw and the parts and everything else and put up a grid and it was life changing. Like the grid was something I could hang off of. Like, I mean, you know, like and it was not attached to the ceiling. So it came down in the corners with feet, and then it went up. You built a square, did the cross rails, and then pushed against the walls. We've talked about it a couple times recently, and then it was totally stable. And then what I realized was how often I was up there. I was up there all the time, moving lights around and doing other things that I would, like, when I do it any other way, I kind of set it and then I just want to forget it. like I don't want to move things around because it's hard. Then when you have a solid grid, you move things around all the time, you know, because you can, you know. And I think that we often have to be very careful of allowing the lack of interface to limit what we do. And I think that is, you know, one of the challenges is that, you know, when an interface is bad or an interface is very limited, what ends up happening, you know, and I would say when not having a grid or just doing things on light stands and everything else, I think that what happens is we make less choices because we have less options.
Yeah, I was just going to show this real quick. I get you, Alex, especially in this setup right here where I have these lights right here.
Right.
If I had the ability to move them, you know, a little more up this way, then that would probably give me the sheen that I want, you know. And
exactly.
So it's just a matter of tweaking and playing with these things and ability to go
but it's
up
hard
and
because
down
they're on
and
a
left
stand
and
or
right.
on the ground, and you're also giving up a ton of real estate on the ground. The other thing you get used to when you have a grid is that everything's up. You know, like, and you just pull everything up, and a lot of times when we build studios, we build the cameras, the PTZs into the grid, so they're just hanging, so nothing's on the floor. Like, you know, so it just feels a lot more open too.
Yeah, and all those cables it doesn't look like a big mess, and especially if it's dark in there and a client comes through. Yeah, all that gack that's on the ground just gets cleared away, and it just looks so much more pristine.
I mean, I built one studio for one of my clients, and it had a pretty nice grid, and then it also had a grid that went up. But the coolest thing is we lifted the floor by 1.5 inches. That was it. Just brought it up. There's this plastic interchangeable or interleaved flooring, and then you run all the cables underneath it. And then right where you want to put a table or something, you just cut a little hole you just do a little cross in the carpet, and you just pull it straight out of there. And they just walked in and said, "This is the nicest studio I've ever seen." You know, and it was a simple update. Wow. You know, because there was no cables anywhere. Like, you know, we put the table down, and then we came right up you know, we got one of the tables that has like a empty, you know, cylinder in the center, right? And so we set that down on top of where we wanted it, and the cables come up and they stay underneath. And so you just walked in, and there's a grid, and everything's very tightly wound. There's the floor and the desk and everything else, and there's no cables anywhere. You know, and it just gave it. What's interesting is it gave you a space to breathe. Like when you walked in, it just felt like a breath of fresh air to just not have clutter. You know, and I didn't realize how important that was to the talent. You know, to just walk in and feel like everything was opened and under control.
Yeah, there's one of the local Fortune 10s here that they're ripping out their old studio, and so I got to go in there and be part of that. And the things that they're putting in now is a huge LED wall, but also, if you remember at Cinegear, we interviewed KinoFlow, and they had these lights that you could put up on the ceiling that would allow you to mimic the colors of whatever the video was supposed to be up there. So you don't have to put LED walls, LED panels on the ceiling. So when I saw these crates coming in, I was like, oh my gosh, these are a lot of KinoFlow, but the grid's already all in place, and they're cleaning up so much of what was in there to just make it super simple. So I'm excited to see the results. Alexander, you had something to add?
Yeah, this kind of sparked my interest when Alex started talking about flooring and raising the floors, because when I bought this condo, which of course now doubles as both my home and my studio, is it had really old laminate flooring and some of it's peeling up, so I'm going to replace it. But I thought, if I'm going to do that, I should probably raise the floor, but I don't know where to source those panels. And I seem to recall the last time Twit moved studios, they did this whole behind the scenes, and Leo showed this modular flooring where he could just pull up a panel and you could see the wires underneath, and you could, like, no matter where you were, you could just pull out that panel and have wires or run wires there. And I don't know who makes that stuff.
Well, that's a lot more, and I'm just trying to find the ones. I don't know if I can find the exact ones we used. This was a decade ago, but I'm just trying to. But a lot of large IT companies raise the floor by feet, like, you know, or by half a foot or a foot, and so it's the whole floor is raised up. You know, if you think about, let me see if I can pull this over here. If you look at this, you know, like this is the kind of, like, they raise the floor so that they can run anything they want underneath it. The kind of stuff that this is, I don't know if this is closer to what we were using. Let's see. You can see how they kind of lift up. They were a little bit higher than this. We had a little bit more space than the ones that are shown here, but it was kind of this kind of flat. It's kind of flat here, but we had more opening down below to pull cable through. But they all just kind of interlocked. I'm going to try to find these are ones that I don't recognize. The company that got them for us, I don't think is still around. I don't think they made it through COVID, so that's why they were importing them, and so but having that 1.5 inches and then being able to just pull cables under it, I didn't even know it existed until I was working on the DNC in 2012, a long time ago, and they did the whole booth with this, and it was a massive space. Not DNC, but the company we were working for did this whole booth as a massive space, and all of it was raised, and it was so they could get all this cabling back and forth and all the other stuff, and it just revolutionized that space. And then that's when I got sucked into these raised spaces, and they make them. The military uses them so they can run things over them. They can run tanks over them. You know, so you can kind of find them there. So I'll try to find something that looks closer to what we used. But again, the company that we sourced it from, they went under during COVID. I did some research when I couldn't find them because I was going to use them for something else, and so but we used them for a couple studios, and it was amazing.
Awesome. Hopefully that gave you some ideas, Jeff. And it looks like we got quite a few questions coming in. So vote on those questions, producers, and we'll answer them in order that they are voted up. So the highest voted questions get thrown right at us. So keep them coming. Next question, Alexander.
This one's from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. From whom have you learned the most useful information in the last 2 years? And what was it?
Yeah, Alexander.
So, you know, as I've been on Office Hours, I don't know how long I've been on the show for, maybe a couple of years now. One of the things that I've been working on is how I communicate with people under stress when problems happen during a show, before a show, that kind of thing. You know, because you'd like to think that everything goes perfectly all the time, but sometimes it doesn't. And I've been really working on my communication. You know, actually, this topic got brought up this morning on Office Hours, and so you know, I tend to listen to the advice that a lot of people here have that do regular productions, you know, on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis. So that's something I've been working on. Is just like, sometimes I find for me, when something happens, like, for example, just the other day, something happened right before a live stream was going to start, and I'm trying to troubleshoot it. I need silence. I can't have people commenting and asking me things and trying to, like, I need to focus. And so just being as diplomatic as possible. Somebody actually gave me the advice this morning to say something as simple as, you know, let's discuss it after the show. And I think that's perfect. That's a perfect response. It communicates very clearly, I need to focus here. I need to have my head down. I need to solve this problem now so that we can actually have a show. And that's something I've been working on over the last few years to get better at.
Well, that's great information, Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, I think that for me, I don't know if it's a single person, but like a project. I think the project that I'm working on right now has been, you know, I'm working on connecting all of these theaters, and I didn't know much about projectors 6 months ago. like now, and I mean, I knew about them, and I actually had tied in a fair number of theaters, but I didn't have to do the work at the level that I was working at, where I really have to dig into all the little details. And I've been fortunate to be surrounded by, you're working with partners that they all know their own pocket. And so you're talking to all the different pockets and pulling all those pockets together into one unified understanding of what's happening. And so for me, and before that, it was a different project that was similar to that, but you get to work with some of the world experts at doing those things. So I'm always fortunate that usually the projects that I'm working on, I get to just talk. For me, it's whoever I'm working with right now is pressing down on, I have to very, very quickly assimilate an enormous amount of information. But fortunately, I have a lot of really talented people around me to ask questions and have conversations to understand it. And so I guess I would say just whatever the last project was, usually is what I learned the most from.
Nice. Yeah, I'd have to say here in office hours, I mean, I've learned a lot from Mickey. Mickey's always in the chat, giving some dose of reality where it's like, I didn't think of that. And a lot of the times it is the most expensive option that's known to man, where he's saying, get the DPA 4099s, and it's like, how much is a 4099? It's like, oh, there's a reason why. Yeah. Some people get the cream of the crop, but it is that buy once, cry once. And I know David Brady's in the chat. He'll say the quality doesn't cost, it pays, and it's true, because some of this stuff you get out in the field and it breaks on you, or the talent just isn't comfortable with that piece. That microphone keeps flopping down because the bar is not as customizable as you thought it would be. So there's just little gotchas, and it's really helpful when we got the real pros here in our community that are willing to give their wisdom and share their knowledge. And so big shout out to Mickey all the way in the Philippines. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and I think he's doing pretty well for being 90 years old. I feel like Mickey must be 90. Like he's like there's so much knowledge in there that you're just like, he cannot be any younger than 80, to have that, to have accumulated that much knowledge. But I do think that overall, I would say that over the last 5 years, I've definitely learned the most as a whole from office hours. I know that I'm sitting here hosting it a lot, but I'm really just being in this conversation every day dramatically changes how I see technology. It makes me smarter. I know there's a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day, but it does I feel like I'm constantly being exposed to things, being challenged to think about things between the chat and the panelists and the questions. I'm constantly being driven forward by that conversation, which I'm very, very grateful for.
Yeah, and I'd have to give a shout out to Jonas and Tucker too. Man, those guys their brains are just at a whole nother level. I feel like this big sometimes when I'm in these meetings and cheering, these guys just whip up a script and it's just like, oh, it's all automated now. I don't have to do that by hand anymore. It's like, man, when you see how some people get things done, but a lot of that stemmed from other people in the community that had the knowledge that they took it just to another level. Somebody started it and planted a seed, and then the next thing you know, they just gobbled it up and took their production knowledge and put it into our realm, and not others where it came from like banking or data management, but now they're using it in video production. Alexander, you want to come back in?
Yeah, and I mentioned I've learned from so many people, and I just wanted to mention Mickey too. And I'm pretty certain his key to staying young is just being in the dark and being out of the sun completely, because that ravages your skin. That's probably a pro tip right there. But there's nothing more humbling than somebody who has been working with audio a long time but never had any experience with audio over IP and implementing Dante in my own network. I felt like such a child trying to implement it, and Mickey gave me a great head start. Honestly, I don't think I could have had it running without him, so he's an integral part of this community.
Nice. Yeah, the name I was trying to think of was Jim Hankins.
Yeah, we're never going to be able to name everybody because there's so many, between, because you were talking about Jonas and Tucker, and then you have Jim, and then you have, JJ, and you have, there's so many people that bring you know, and you know, Courtney invented the teleprompter, you know, like not all teleprompters, but the electronic teleprompter, you know, like, I mean, he just hangs out with us, you know, the inventor of the teleprompter just kind of hangs out with us. And so I think that there's, and then, you know, again, you know, on the audio days, you see Jeff Francis and Marty Atias and all these folks and Chris Jellin and all these folks that are just that they, you know, again, on any given day, a lot of times we end up, I know we should probably move on because we're just patting the office hour backs. But I will say that I'm, you know, I used to say this pretty often. I don't say it as much anymore, but I'll be like, there's 400 years of, or 80 years or 200 years of experience in this panel today, you know, and I think that's the incredible thing is between everybody that's in the panel, they all bring some wisdom that it makes it worth it.
Nice. Let's go ahead and jump over to that next question.
Jeff Veely in Henderson, Texas. Do you use Raspberry Pis? If so, which ones and what do you use them for?
Go ahead, Alexander.
Every time I look at Raspberry Pis, I look at the price of an assembled one and I think it's really not that much cheaper than buying a pre-made Windows PC. I've been buying these Melee PCs off of Amazon after Courtney started recommending them, and now I have 3 of them, and I'm not really saving that much money. I mean, other than the fact that maybe you can run Linux on them, which, look, nothing against Raspberry Pis, they have great utilitarian value, but for me, I just looked at the costs and I didn't really see a huge benefit.
Go ahead, Alex.
Until I moved something over here, I had a Raspberry Pi that was using Playout B, and it was just looping. It just sat there looping away. So I needed a video that was going to do something, I would just point to it, and it would loop. And it was great for me to have this something that I was running, and I think it might have ran for months at a time before without looking. It might have been a year that it just sat there, and it was a great little thing for a little box to sit there and just provide me a test signal as needed. You know, that I could just cut to. It's great.
Nice. Next question.
This one is from me, Alexander Knight, Port Coquitlam, BC. Single large source of light plus 1 hair/shoulder light. Boring flat lighting or a good idea? We'll be testing lighting myself tomorrow with just an Amaran F22X.
Go ahead, Alex.
I have a big boring light, as you can see, and I am not trying to make a film. so I am, you know, I think that we used to think, so I brought in DPs for some of the stuff that I did, that were, you know, came out of film, and they would light people, you know, I mean, they would look amazing when they finished lighting them, but they had a look to it. And the thing that the feedback we mostly got when we were bringing them into news broadcasts or to live events or whatever is, wow, it was a little bit of a, you're working too hard kind of thing. Like, it makes you look like you're efforting. So I will say that generally my attempt at lighting is to make it subtle. Like, it doesn't look like I'm doing anything. Like, I just happen to be, you know, like, I don't want you to see a hair light, even though there is a hair light. I don't want you to see that there's a blue lights on the background, even though it's just slightly blue back there. You know, it's not like there's nothing about it that has any, and then the light on me just looks like a light. Like, it doesn't, I don't want it to look like I'm trying, you know, and so that's why I tend to pick very large sources. And I have to admit, we did a show where they wanted to look like outside. So we had these, these Kineflows, these giant, Image 80s. And we had 4 of them put next, 2 on one side and 2 on another, behind a big frame, and it was like just these giant sources in somebody's office. And I liked it so much that I just never went back. Like, it was just like this giant light that was gorgeous, and so I now I can't make my lights big enough to, you know, because it just kind of fills everything in. So.
Yeah, one of the things about these giant sources, like well, not giant, I mean, it's 2 feet by 2 feet, is that you can just, if you put them directly in front of you, you're going to get what they call 1-to-1 flat lighting. And if you want to develop a little bit more contrast, you can bounce that light. So you can put it on one side. So you can see in my setup, I have 2 lights, but they're at different dimming settings, so that there's a little bit of a difference. You can see here, this is the Aperture F22. with the egg crate on it. And you can see what happens as you start to, get these close lights, what's going on with my hair. So some of these lights, the nice thing about them is when they're so light, you can position them overhead with you don't have to get a big menace stand. You could use, I know Alex would say, get a grid, but for the temporary folks, there are ways of using these lower powered lights to get them closer. But don't be afraid of using bounce. You could use foam core. You could use these PhotoFlex type circular diffusers, 5-in-1s that you could have silver, gold, and you can bounce not just the white, but you could warm up by using one of the other sheens, and that way you don't have to buy a whole nother light. It just depends on, again, on that ratio, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, because you can see what happens when I turn one off. So you can see how much more how that just falls off. But this is the nice thing about soft light, like these light mats, is that you get this Hollywood V, they call it, and you get this nice trail that falls off gently. Because if this was hard light, that would just be a hard stream, hard line there. And instead it's soft and it's gorgeous. It wraps around. So that's the beauty of getting these nice lights, and then having the egg crate gives you that ability to shape the light, put it where you want. Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, so I mentioned that one of my small panels had died, so that one over here is turned off. So obviously it created on the left side of my face, I have a little bit more of a shadow and it's a little bit darker. They got this V shape happening here. Do you think, is this too cinematic? Is this too contrasty for this type of thing?
No, but this is where you would want to figure out where do you want that light as far as up or down, because you do have quite a bit of shadow underneath your chin, and a lot of people would say hey, fill that in. So when that's the downside to having lights too far up, is that you do need to start to get something from below. And you can, again, use bounce. If you look at Peter Hurley, he's the headshot guy. He has this, he developed with Westcott a reflector that actually mounts underneath the chin for these headshots, just to bounce, so he goes up high and then he bounces light down and fills in. It's I think they call that butterfly lighting. Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to show this. This is the light. This was the rig. Hold on. Oops, no, that's not it. Let's see. That was me trying to find flooring. Let's try this. So this was the rig I was talking about, where you have these Image 80s all stacked up behind this, behind a softbox, or basically building a softbox with those, and then you can kind of see and now this did have a little bit of direction to it, but then that was bouncing, from there, but a lot of bounce light for this space, but when corrected for the camera, you kind of see this big soft, and they said we just want to feel like we're outside, and so that was it. And this was our little control center for the live show over here. Big mess, but those are, if you're asking when you're talking about ISO records, this is the old-fashioned ISO records, a whole bunch of Pix 240s that were all pulling those ISO out there. But anyway, that's when we talk about light sources, I always think of this one as the big light source. So.
Yeah, the other nice thing about having big lights like this that have appropriate power is that you can get the exposure right, because I see a lot of folks trying to have their aperture all the way open, and then they're even having to gain up or use an ISO that's something with some noise. So that's the beauty of optimizing your exposure, because you have the control with the large enough source and then the ability to dim it and lock it in. Let's go jump to the next question.
This one's coming from Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri, on the importance of cultivating all professional relationships, regardless of how inconsequential they may seem. Alex, did you ever meet the "it'll be there tomorrow" guy from Sony?
Alex.
I was talking about when we ordered. There was a point where I was talking about, I don't remember where, in one of these shows, I was talking about the fact that when we ordered from Sony, it took me a minute for him to think what Vic was talking about. When I worked for Sony as a marketing, in the college marketing department, you'd call and you'd type in numbers. Like you had a pamphlet that said, these are the numbers. And so you'd go, I want this number and I want this quantity. And, and you'd put your code in, it knew what the address was, but someone would immediately pick it up and they would repeat it. And the guy would pick it up and go, It was out of New Jersey, and there was this guy that would always be like, say, yeah, 10 of the spin actors, new CD, and you'd be like, yeah, and he goes, all right, it'll be that tomorrow. And that was, but no matter what you ordered, it would always be at the end, all right, it'll be that tomorrow. Anyway, he asked if I'd ever met him. I have no idea who that guy is. I don't know his name. I remember his voice because it was so funny. The funny one is I ordered 1,000 of 1,000 of Alice in Chains Man in a Box, the cassette singles. And he was just like, what are you doing with 1,000? You really need 1,000? You need 1,000 of these? What are you doing here? I don't understand. And I said, I'm doing this promotion. I'm trying to build up a mailing list and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you need 1,000? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, it'll be there tomorrow. He's gave up. Like he was going to ask me. And then after that, he was just like, okay, whatever. That's not my disc. I will admit he was right. I think I had like 400. I gave away 600 of them, but I still had 400. People would come over to my house and I'd be like, here, have a cassette. So, and it was a great experience when you're 20 years old and you just have this wall of giveaways. So I had CDs and posters and T-shirts and everything else. And anybody who visited the house, I was like, here, have some things, because I could always order more and fill the room. It was good.
All right, let's jump over to the next question.
Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas, USA. If all video switcher makers supported a standardized API for control and status so that software written to that standard can control any compliant switcher, would this make things better or seem as stifling of advancements?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, there's two directions to go with this. So either everybody builds the same standard, or a company figures out a way to abstract the complexity of all the switchers into its own abstraction, and then builds you a way to control it so that whatever control you go to goes to any one of those switchers. So they're managing so instead of that, if you have all these switchers, what you really want to do, the easiest way to do this is let them be them. Let them, you be you when you're talking to the switcher, but you have an abstracted communication here where you're basically, so then our commands come into here and it just knows what switcher it's talking to, and it just says it speaks the right language to that switcher. And the company that has figured that out is Skarhoy. So Skarhoy, basically what they do is they have a whole layer of abstraction that sits on top. And I can't think of what it's called right now off the top of my head, but
blue pill.
Yeah. And so they've abstracted the complexity of all the switchers, and then they simply can take those commands and then redistribute them back to the switcher. So that's another direction to do it with.
Them as well as central control. Yeah, central control is another translation tool, but you do have to run it in software. So now all of a sudden you have to have a computer that's running that to do that translation on that intermediate connection. So you bring it in and then you kick it back out. But yeah, Skarhoy is definitely that's hardware. Nowadays you can get the blue pill inside of the switcher. Before it was a little box. Well, it still is. You can still buy the little box, and that's the translator essentially. But yeah, it's exciting stuff, and there's more people coming out with more. But to answer the question, yeah, it would be amazing to have 95% of that stuff just as a standard. I mean, I guess that's why SMPTE and some of these other organizations, ISO standards exist, is to try to reel in the herd the cats. But different people are going to be innovative and always break the mold.
Well, and it's hard. When you go to a standard or when you build an API, as soon as you build that, you are limiting what you can do later. And so because now you're going to break everything. So you're going to and then you have a bunch of developers that are complaining, and they're going on Twitter and they're doing whatever they're going to do. So a lot of times people say, oh, they're just trying to maintain control of it. No, they just don't want to expend resources on supporting it. That's the main reason people don't build APIs or SDKs, is because they don't want to go through the trouble. I think that the far end of that, of being open to that, is probably the Liminal team. I know we keep on coming back to the Liminal team, but they use their own API. Like they build all these new tools using the things that they're making for developers to make sure that they're not doing anything that the developers can't do. And so that drives instead of making the API something outside of what they're doing that works with the external world, they're continually dogfooding the API. And I think that's the right way to go with that. But I do think that once you start to say, oh, we want to work inside of the standards of other people, you are limiting if you think of something you want to do, a lot of when they're manufacturing, they just want to go do it. Like they want to go do, and not have to think about, oh, I have to now think about all the things that have to occur to make that actually happen, because that does slow down innovation.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is some people just want their proprietary locked-in feature where nobody else has it, and this is our secret sauce. Grass valleys of the world.
They want to license it to you.
This is, yeah.
Like we had
top dollar
for my Sony 950. There was a piece of software that would run it, like that would control it, but only a handful of people from ILM had it outside of Sony. And so it only worked on the old laptop that they had there. So there was this one guy that I would bring into shows because I needed to be able to control the 950 from a laptop instead of the CCU and everything else. And he'd be able to set everything, turn the fans on and off, do whatever it is. But when that laptop died, that was the end. like there was it was just installed. It was hard coded into that laptop. And so, but Sony didn't want to have people, and I think there a little bit was protecting the cameras, because there was enough control inside of that thing to burn the camera into the ground, so that was the other problem.
Nice. All right, next question.
This question is coming from me. Alex Lindsay, do you use the source performance monitor in Memo Live to verify Zoom ISO sources are not having major issues with their connection and video pipeline? Yeah,
so I'm about to start doing the firesides again, and that's where I've been using it. And with Michael Krasny's show, because we couldn't do double-ended recordings, we kind of slowed down on using Zoom for our shows, because we really felt like the difference is a lot of times when you do a show where everyone's got a mic and everyone's got a hard connection, everyone's got everything, it doesn't really matter that, Zoom's perfect for that. When you're bringing in lots of people who, have laptops and might have a mic, and sometimes, and they definitely don't have wired connections, the amount of errata that occurs was just more than we could manage. And so we just decided to go to Riverside for that for the time being, and until maybe someday when we hope that Zoom will be able to do double-ended. So as a result, I haven't used Mimo for a while for these types of things. I am going to use it for the fireside chats as we move forward. When I did it back then, in the last time that I did it, I wasn't using the built-in plugin. Mostly just couldn't get my head around it. And once I got my head around it, it was right when we were finishing up that and deciding we're going to move to Riverside for a while. But so almost all the work that I've done with Zoom ISO and Mimo has been related to using Zoom ISO and delivering all the video feeds from Zoom ISO to Mimo Live, and then delivering. So what I do is for the way I've done it in the past, is that I have Zoom ISO, and it sends video over to Mimo, but it also sends audio over to Audio Hijack. And so so that in this case,
how is it delivering the video?
Zoom ISO will deliver video. It delivers it as Siphon. So it's a Siphon delivery. It's so Siphon is a way to send frames from one app to another inside of a Mac. And so I'm using Siphon to get from Zoom ISO to Mimo. And so it just shows up as a source. If I was going to do it today, I'd probably be pretty tempted to use, the funny thing is that when I was listening to you talk about audio, I would have Mimo manage the show, but if I was going to do anything in post, or I wanted to use it for a podcast, I'd probably still have Zoom ISO in there and be passing off, because Zoom ISO I can send all my video files, but I can also send all the audio files. So, and I can send all the channels that I want to from audio out to another source. And so that's how I built that pipeline, and it was very successful. But it does look like it will be simpler in a lot of ways to use Mimo for that. But I would still be tempted, if I was using audio, to have a separate device grabbing that. Now, we also backed up the footage by using we backed up the footage by using the MixPre. So, because most of ours are one-on-one conversations, and so we would record to the MixPre as well.
Nice. All right, let's jump to the next question.
Next question is coming from Talalik Lopez Waterman in New Mexico, USA. What's the pathway between a file from Polycam or other 3D capture options and a super accurate CAD drafting?
Alex.
Yeah. So, I mean, the hardest part with Polycam is that it can fall apart. Like you just don't get enough data and you get big holes in it and so on and so forth. So that's the challenge with Polycam, but it's nice because you have it on a phone. So if you're able to get a good capture, and you'll know if you got a good capture once you processed it. But if you get a good capture, Polycam has, at least the one I have, I think I have the pro version that costs a bunch of money. I don't know exactly what I don't know. I think I pay $100 a year or something for it, but I use it all the time. So it doesn't, I'm fine with it. Anyway, with Polycam, I typically export as an OBJ. So that tends to be now, if I want to send it to somebody or show it to somebody or impress somebody and go, look at how cool this is, then I save it out as a USDZ, and I can text it. If I text it to any Apple user, if I send you a USDZ file, you will be able to open it on your phone, and literally with Polycam, it'll pop out at 1-to-1 scale. So if I send you a picture of a room, if you're in a big enough space, you can just walk around the room with your phone and look around. It's kind of cool. So, but you can also just squeeze it down and make it smaller, set it on your desktop or whatever else you want to do. So, so that's how I use. So if I'm sending the raw footage to somebody, then I'll send it as a USDZ. If I'm going to convert it, typically we'll change it to an OBJ. And now what we do is take that OBJ into typically SketchUp, and in SketchUp we'll rebuild the model. The challenge with oftentimes, if we're doing a large space, is that the number of polygons dedicated to each item is low. So if you have a small object or a specific object, we might it'll throw a lot of polygons at it, but it does have some limit to the polygonal density or the overall file size. So, like for instance, I've done a couple of these in movie theaters, and I'll scan the whole theater with my phone if I don't have something better. But then I save that out. But then I'll go to specific items that are important to me, like the chair, like the seat. So the seat is important to me, closed and open. So I'll digitize that by itself. And then I might digitize a couple other things that are important to me by themselves. And the reason I do that is that I'll get a lot more polygons dedicated to that. So then we'll build that model from the individual seat, but then we'll use the larger one to figure out where they're spaced and where they all are and everything else, because it's got enough information to do that, but it doesn't have enough information to do the other part. So anyway, so we end up modeling. I mean, you can use a Vectorworks or anything else to, what you're using there is you're just using this as a template. It's kind of like if you were doing something and you wanted to you just shot some pictures that you're going to put under in Photoshop and trace them. That's kind of what we're doing with in 3D. Now, if we do it with a BLK 360, which we also do, which we scan spaces with that BLK 360, it's a little bit messier. It's a lot more high resolution, but we'll go around and we'll get 5 or 6 points from a space. Then we have to use the iPad. I'm too cheap to spend $4,500 on their Cyclone software, so I use the iPad and I one by one take them out of the iPad into E57s, and the E57s we usually take into an Autodesk tool that is not popping into my head. Not Revit. Everyone always says, "Is it Revit?" And it's not Revit. It's anyway. So we take it in there and we sync them up together. Then we bring them back into again SketchUp and then rebuild them all and deliver them from SketchUp.
On that note, is there a fast way from Polycam to give a client the ability to measure because since I have the app, when I share, they don't get the measuring tool, which is huge if you're trying to let them see.
I think if they have Polycam, and I don't think they need
these guys didn't have Polycam. It was, they're not advanced users.
I know. I think if they do have Polycam, I think they can open it. I think the free version or whatever will open something if you send it to them.
Gotcha.
And then
because these guys just opened it up in the web browser and they couldn't measure. And I was like, can't you just run? Because we're running fiber, and I was like, let's run it this direction, and here's the measurement. Yeah. And I was trying to show them that you don't want to go the way that they had intended. So
yeah, exactly. I think that I don't know for sure, but I think that you can send it to the free version because I have the paid version, so I don't know how I'd be able to test that. So, but you should be able to send a Polycam file to somebody else, and they'd have to get Polycam, but then they should be able to measure it from there.
Gotcha. All right, next question.
This one's from Paul Kovacs in Elkhart. Instead of installing a grid, my work studio room has a drop ceiling. Can I just use that with scissor mounts as long as I keep to lightweight items, lights, etc.? Thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
you can put a surprising amount of weight on a drop ceiling. So I will say, people will not suggest, and if you put too much weight on, I'll see if I can find another picture for you for that. But we have installed a lot into drop ceilings with scissor clips. You have to be careful, and you have to pay attention to how often they're being supported from the ceiling, and where those things are. But if you're, you do have to be conscious, but yeah, you can definitely do it.
Yeah, if you talk to the building owner or maintenance, you can also see about just drilling right into the ceiling above, and then bringing a metal rod down and adding additional support depending on how heavy the fixture is. Because I was just taking out some of these huge light panels, Geminis, and this is exactly what they had done. They had just drilled right into the ceiling and put these support bars. They were just like threaded steel support bars that the maintenance guys, and I had them run some additional electrical. And when they did that, they did the same thing. They just shot a fastener into the ceiling. It was like that popcorn spray stuff, and it was in a downtown high rise, so they just shot it right up. And then I'd imagine you could do the exact same thing, is just reinforce what you got.
Yeah, I was trying to find a picture of it, but I don't know if I'll be able to get to it in time. Anyway, but yeah, we've put up multiple 4x4s and divas and mics and all in the same grid, and so you look at it and you go, oh, I don't know if I can, but you can, and I wouldn't have anyone inspect it from OSHA, and I'd probably be careful of it, and that kind of thing, but it never felt like it was falling down. Like it was, they're pretty secure up there. What I will say is that we're pretty careful about distributing weight. So a lot of times what we're going to do is oftentimes try to attach them to one thing to multiple places there to just keep the weight. It's really not how much weight, it's how it's distributed. It's kind of like the reverse of ice.
Yeah. The other thing that I have seen in a couple corporate buildings is to use those auto poles and do like these inverted goalposts, so they're latching on to something further down the hall, and then they're putting the auto pole across, and then they hook onto the auto pole from the ceiling. So they do have to leave it open. So one of the tiles has to be taken out so they could hook on. Or if you got plenty of the tiles, you can just cut them. You could take an X-Acto knife and you can cut those. So sometimes they'll have spares of those things, or they're not very expensive, and you can just cut them and put reinforcement up there. All right, next question. Or actually, we're going to jump over to content suggestions. You got a pick, Alex?
Oh, I do, and I was gonna. I keep on changing it because I keep on seeing something really cool. But the one that I thought was, I'm just trying to see if I can find it. Go to Alex first, and I'll find it. Hold on.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, my suggestion, I had to come up with this real quick, but if you're a Mac user, you might already know about this app, but it's a bit underappreciated, and it's been a while since I've used it, but I recently started to install Django Software's iStat menus on all of my Macs, and it's kind of just invisible. It's there in the menu bar, but it includes very useful telemetry about what's happening with your computer. Yes, you can open Activity Monitor and look at CPU resources and everything, but in a production, I find it incredibly useful. So when I'm stress testing Memo Live or doing anything that's software based, where I'm doing video and audio production, it's really, really cool to be able to see how much memory is being used, how much CPU resources are being used, how much GPU resources are being used. And it shows you a lot more than that. So it's incredibly cheap. And if you own a Mac, I would highly suggest you use it.
Or if you own multiple Macs, you buy once and you can install it on as many as you want. Yeah, and on almost everything. I know Alex does as well. Yeah, it's super popular.
I have it. I'm looking at it right now. I think almost since they came out, I've had it on almost all my Macs. It's when you can't figure out what's going on, there's nothing like looking up and to see if you're actually getting bandwidth, or am I downloading at full speed, or all of those things. It's awesome. Yeah, just awesome.
Were you able to find yours, Alex?
I was, because it's a little bit obscure. That's why it was hard for me to I was looking for my phone. I was like, where did I put this? So I have this thing, I've talked about it before, called NOAA, which is News Over Audio, and I listen to it a lot. I listen to a lot of art. I don't Oh, I like reading. So I like to listen to as much as I can. I read reference books. That's all I'm reading reference manuals for what I'm working on, but that's all the reading I do. And everything else is all just listening. Like I listen to content all the time. And so I was listening to this and they brought up this thing from 1995 and it said, we really think that you should watch this. We think this is worth listening to at NOAA. And it is from Harvard Business Review. And it is called Disruptive Technologies Catching the Wave by Harvard Business Review. And I've now listened to it twice. I'll probably listen to it a couple more times. It's so good. And what's important is that it talks about, disruption and innovation and everything else. And what's important is it happens before Steve Jobs, because every time anything after 1999 or 2000, or definitely after 2001, will always come back to Steve Jobs, right? Because he just changed so many markets by himself almost. That's what it felt like, right? So 1995 is before Steve kind of thing where they're talking about just other companies that, and what they really talked about was how often companies will they'll listen to their customers. And that's a problem because their customers just want this one thing, and it holds them in a position where they stay in the position that their customers want, but they're not innovating into the next thing, and then they get run over by the next thing, right? The next thing, builds up really quickly, and they were actually, what got them in trouble was actually being responsive to their customers and not looking for the next, not looking down the field about what's next. And so they were like, they were talking about how their customers wanted a certain price per megabyte for Seagate. And so Seagate didn't want to go down to 3.5-inch drives because they had these 5.25-inch drives that they couldn't get that efficiency there. So they just didn't go there. And then they just got wiped out at that moment, out of that market because other people came up at that same time. And they just talk how this happens over and over again, where an incumbent will be by being responsive to their customers perfectly and staying totally focused on what they want, aren't looking at what they're going to want in the future. That's, and innovate. And some companies do. I think a lot of times now companies have big R&D teams that are trying to figure out what the next thing is. Google has a whole bunch of teams that do a bunch of stuff that's never going to go anywhere. but it allows them to think about it, and some of them do, and they're really glad that they started when they did.
Yeah, like Blackmagic has an amazing amount of R&D budget. I was reading an article today because there's a new CEO of Adamus, and it turns out that he was one of the original founders of Blackmagic, and I had no idea. But on that NOAA note, is that a free app or is that a paid app?
The app is,
how are you listening to it?
It's like $9 a month or $10 a month or something like that, worth every single. I'm not a big subscription person. Like I've just kind of I've been slowly turning off all my subscriptions, but this one and YouTube Premium are probably the two last ones that I would give up because and I think that what I'll do is I'll put in. I don't know if I'm allowed to. I'm not allowed, but I don't know how many people I can. I just shared this with somebody else and they're like, oh, it was free. Thanks. For like a free article inside of the app. So I'm going to put the link to it in the chat and people can click on it. I think if you have the NOAA app, because I put the link in, that maybe you get that article for free to listen to. Otherwise you can probably find it somewhere if you do a search. It was 20 years ago. So if you do a search for
you had brought this up over the weekend, and I had done a search, and it was behind a HBR Harvard Business Review paywall.
Really
but if you go to
sure.
archive.is and type in that same or copy and paste that same URL, you can get past the paywall and read the article. At least it's one of the ways of getting past them. But that sounds like a cool one. And it reminds me of Amazon. They have something called the voice of the customer, and so at meetings they would put a empty seat and just label it the voice of the customer. So they were always trying to figure out, they want it cheaper. They want it faster. Like what matters. And that's what got them into the juggernaut that they are today, is they left that voice of the customer, because sometimes it wasn't about what we thought, it was what's coming out of their mouth, and they vote with their pocketbook. So you got to listen to them.
And just because it also just came out, I'm going to say one more that I would, Grant always makes fun of me because I always want to put two in.
The two.
But the second one is there is on YouTube right now. There's one that Scott Galloway and Rory Sutherland is the era of the brand over, and it's by the channel is on Uncensored CMO. I watch an inordinate amount of Scott Galloway and Rory Sutherland, and so the fact that both of them are in the same room at the same time talking, so good. So
It's gold.
so it just there's Scott Galloway is like, I mean, if you're not listening to Scott Galloway, like, you know, he's so flat and so good. And Roy Sutherland, I just love his TikToks of all the stuff that, you know, all these little like things you never thought about with marketing. He's been working with some of the largest marketing firms, and just these are weird facts about how people interact with things. And so anyway, it just came out over the weekend, I think, or on Friday, and it's so worth it.
Gonna have to tune into that one.
Yeah.
All right, mine is an audio book that I recently got turned on to somewhere along the interwebs. It's called Careless People, A Cautionary Tale of Power, Greed, and Lost Idealism by Sarah Wynne Williams. And it's basically the story of her tenure at Facebook. And man, there's a lot that they had to do in those early days. I mean, I know, Alex, you lived that drama as some of the shifts that occurred during 2014, 2015, 2016, the whole Cambridge Analytica, that stuff, to have the inside scoop as to how things were going down. I mean, some people had to do some pretty extraordinary things to make things happen, and they were put under a lot of pressure. And there's definitely a lot of greed going on that you would just not think that people would do, and they call them out on it. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, there's not a lot there I can comment about, but I was pretty close to that point. so
you want to read this one or listen to it. It's about a 12-hour audiobook. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's my
I think a lot of times when we were doing early testing with Mokana, you know, or Commenda, which is the sister app of Mokana, when we were testing Commenda, we couldn't believe the access that we had in Facebook Live. We could just take any Facebook Live. We would go, there used to be this, if you went to facebook.com/live, I don't know if it's still there or not, but there used to be a map, and you would just see all the live streams that are happening all over the world, and you could go and look at the large ones, and we would just click on a large one and point Commenda. We would just drop the URL into Commenda, and it would just start grabbing all of the chat. Like it would just grab the chat out of those, and it would, like, the names, everything, just pull all the stuff out of it.
Thumbnails.
And it was just like, oh yeah, everything, thumbnails, names, and the reason we used it, we just threw stuff away. We didn't. We were building tools to allow us to handle Facebook events. And so we wanted to make sure we could scale, and we got to a point where we could scale to our biggest event with HBO was like probably, I don't know, like 130,000 interactions a minute or something like that with a lot of people. And so we were able to scale up to that. But to get there, we had to test it against something. And you can build things in AWS to test things, but nothing's like testing it against humans. You know? So we were able to just test it and throw it in. Now, once we were done, we just deleted the event. We didn't want to keep that data for a variety of reasons. But Cambridge Analytica, we just go in there and grab it and keep it. You know, and so, but it was amazing. It was so open. And it's one of the reasons like Mokana can do things that almost no other app can do at scale, because we were able to test it against these massive events that you can't. The problem is when the event's that big and it fails, you're screwed. So no one can test it against a big event anymore, you know, and that's but it was really, anyway, it was interesting.
All right. On that note, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks to the panelists for joining me, and hopefully Grant was able to weather through his production. We'll hear about it next week. I want to thank the crew, Alan and Peter, for driving not only the questions in the back end here, that they also are running VisVector. And so cool to be able to use these different tools and on the different days of the week have the different shows and push this stuff to the limits. So thank you to that back end crew, and thank you to all the producers that voted on the questions and submitted questions. And if you didn't get yours answered on this week's show, tune in next week and drop it in there, or tomorrow morning, join us on Office Hours.